Welcome to the Monastery Church of the Sacred Heart in Yonkers, New York, with Brother Roger, who is the archivist and wonderful historian of Blessed Solanus's years here and in New York also. This is the first place that Solanus was missioned to right after he was ordained in 1904. He came to Sacred Heart in Yonkers and was here from 1904 till 1918. And at that time, you said before that this was called Hogs Hill because this is where the farmers would bring their pigs, right? And it was open fields, farms, which really helped Solanus to feel at home, that this is similar, or was similar, to how he grew up. And he would write about the beauty of the hills that reminded him of the hills around the Mississippi when he grew up in Prescott, Wisconsin, and he could see the Palisades. This was his first love. And he learned really how to be a priest with his limitations here at Sacred Heart in Yonkers. And it was always a very special place to him. So this was all the time that Solanus was here, this was being built.
He came in 1904,
That's right.
and this started in 1913.
It started
So
in
Solanus
19...
came here after his first Mass.
Uh-huh.
After his first Mass was completed, he came here,
Yes.
1904.
Yes.
And he stayed here for the next 14 years.
Yes.
But they started the putting together of this church in 1913. And before he left in 1917, he was here for the dedication of the church.
And he came back from a trip or something
Yeah,
that...
he came back from his
that
parents, I think
his,
his parents jubilee, 50th
yes,
jubilee.
and
in Times
he
Square.
wanted to be here.
Right.
And so you said 1891, that's when the parish started.
The parish started in 1891. Solanus arrived in 1904.
Yes. And
This was called Hogs Hill. This is where the hogs were raised. But again, Bonaventure, being from Switzerland, if he possibly would choose to build on the highest point,
very
be the
Swiss
lamp
and
on the
German.
lampstand.
That's right.
And-
The city built on the hill.
And I believe this might have been, I'm not sure, that Francis Haas was ecstatic because he had a great devotion to the Sacred Heart. And we
yes.
finally had a parish dedicated to the Sacred Heart.
Oh,
So that made, they named it after, with the Sacred Heart because Francis Haas always wanted to have one of our locations named in honor of the Sacred Heart. So he was very happy with that.
well, and that's, I didn't know that part of it,
Yeah.
but you know that he began the Arch Confraternity of the Sacred Heart
Yes,
in Detroit.
In Detroit.
And we still have the altar dedicated in remembrance of that.
Oh,
So, yes, so, and was Bonaventure from 1891 the kind of originator of the parish?
Yes. Yeah. No,
Oh.
they wanted a parish. Basically, this place was set up so it was outside New York City, up in the hills, fresh air, and it gave the friars working in the city with the early immigrants a place to go to recuperate and to rest and to contemplate before going back to work in the city.
And to see some grass and trees.
Right. And strangely enough, over 100 and almost 130 years later, this has become the senior residence for the senior friars who come and spend their final years here.
That's right.
And the provincial cemetery is here.
Yes.
So
But the hogs aren't here anymore.
the hogs are not here. The hogs are not here. That can be a guarantee.
So if that were still here in 1891, that wouldn't have been when Francis,
Right.
Solanus came.
No.
So the smell might not have always been
No.
fresh air.
No. he basically was here. He was very happy here.
Oh, I
And
know.
then he got a call saying, "You're being transferred. You're going to Our Lady of Sorrows.
Sorrows.
Be there tomorrow."
Yes, yes.
And
This was his first love.
this was his first love, and they didn't know what to do with him because he was in charge of the altar service. He was in charge of the ladies' guild, and he still didn't have enough work. So they said,
And he
well,
was sacristan.
sacristan.
Yes.
And they said, well, why don't you go help the brother at the front desk? And that's where his ministry lost him.
Yes, and that happened 2 years after he came.
here, right.
And Bonaventure was replaced by this Aloysius.
Right,
and it
right.
was Aloysius
Who-
that opened up that area, which is the Portering,
Right, right.
and defined the rest of his
Right.
life.
And people still come here whose father and grandfather were baptized or, had a connection to Solanus. We have Eddie D., who was in the high school with his brother Dacian D., who was our provincial.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And he served Solanus' mass, here when he was a boy growing up in the parish. So there are still live connections to Solanus.
And that's a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. When we were renovating, restoring the church, we removed the pews that were there for over 100 years. And we restored the pews, but the pews were very tight between each one. So we removed one row of pews between each pillar in the church. We took those pews, had them cut back, and used them for this chapel here. So those are original pews from the church. And this was the sacristy, and back here was the altar boys room and the supply room.
All of which was very significant in Solanus'
His
life.
time, right.
That's right. The first ministries that he had as a priest.
I was here in this room
That's
as a
right.
sacristan.
That's right. And then altar server director.
Right.
Teaching
Okay.
teaching the young boys how to serve.
Right, and they tried his patience.
Yes, they did, because he loved the Mass, and if you weren't reverent, that was very hard for him.
No.
But, and of course, those were his first positions, because what do you do with a priest that
Right.
can't hear confessions or preach public? Well, he could be sacristan,
Right.
he could teach the servers,
Right.
and Solanus
Right.
never, ever, it's like, I will be close to the Blessed Sacrament.
Right.
And I will be able to teach the young boys how
Right.
to love the Blessed Sacrament, the Mass.
Correct.
And so he never felt put down.
No.
So this is where his ministry as a priest
As a
began.
priest in this room.
That's right.
Which is now a chapel in his honor.
Isn't that wonderful? With the same pews that were in the
That were from the church.
chapel. And you do use this, you say.
Well, we haven't used it because of COVID.
Oh, yes.
Because the people are too close. So we went back to using the church because people can separate and keep the safe distance.
Yes.
But normally at a 6:45 a.m. Mass, the chapel is packed. And it saves us on electricity or heating by having it in here
Right. In
rather
winter.
than using the whole church.
Yes.
The
Yes.
stained glass windows are all captioned friars who are saints or blessed.
And would that have been here during Francis' Solanus' time?
Yes.
Those
The oldest
different
windows are in the
Capuchin
upper
saints,
church.
huh?
We do everything in stages.
Saint Felix and right.
Brisbane of Viterbo. Their names are underneath each of the windows with the year of birth and death, and then the English translation of the Latin terms in the window.
I
And I'm
see.
not going to be here forever to.
And of course, looking at these names, William and Clara
McSpedden,
sped
was
on,
their
and
family.
the Irish names
Yes.
that certainly made Solanus feel at home, because this was
Yeah.
originally mainly Irish,
Irish, yeah.
and then it was quite German, and then, as we said, it became more Italian.
Right.
So it was a good. This really was his foundation as a
right.
priest.
No, he said he enjoyed his years here in letters to his family. And he said, you know, I cherish the years I've been at Sacred Heart.
Well, and also in his room, which we probably will see that area, he could see the Hudson.
He could see the Hudson,
And the beauty of it reminded
Yeah.
him in a different way of the beauty he had experienced when he grew up near
growing up, this was all fields of corn and so forth. So he was very much feeling like he was back home in the West.
Yes.
You know? Not the center one, but this is the original vesting table from when Solanus was here.
Oh.
And they took it from the sacristy and they moved it into here.
Oh, okay. Wow.
You know?
It's very good.
So that's all original from when the Father Solanus was here.
And very well preserved.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and the altar was here, and the friars had choir stalls here. When it was
Okay, this was the choir
the
chapel.
choir chapel for
Right.
the friars of Sacred Heart.
Oh, okay. And the
They faced one another, or sometimes they could move it. So it varied from year to year if you were facing one another in choir, or if you were both looking towards the altar.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else is new. We all put all this in.
That was for the size of the community at the time. That was very large.
Yeah, that was very large for,
Yeah.
you know.
Beautiful.
Yeah. He would have sat in these benches for the Mass and for the office.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And they were in that.
and they were in this, where the sacristy is now. These were all the choir stalls from the original chapel from when Solanus was here. But from 1913 on.
Yes, yes.
These altars. We have two sets, and all the wood carvings from that Mary Immaculate and Garrison have all been preserved. They're all in this location, except one in the museum. And the altar carvings underneath were framed and put in different locations. So we tried to bring as much of our history with us.
Well, and of course, Mary Immaculate, as you know, in Garrison, didn't happen while Solanus was here. It was only in the late 20s.
Right.
But when he was at St. Michael's,
Right.
he made a retreat up there and
Right.
and would go swimming up there.
Right, and also he said he talked at the first Mass for Father Paul Watson, who was the founder of the Graymore Friars. When he came into the church,
Right.
it was Solanus Casey who went and gave the talk.
Yes, yes,
for him.
yes, and was very important
Yeah.
friendship.
Yeah,
So all of these are from Garrison.
Garrison.
Yes.
We only have two complete sets of the altars and the piece, but all the wood carvings you'll see throughout the building.
You, mainly you, and your whole province, because of this and what you've done over there, you've done a much better job than we of maintaining, preserving your history and.
The prime piece for the Heritage Building is the statue. Pope Pius IX, when he made Mary Immaculate an official dogma and teaching of the Church, he commissioned to have this statue made. And when he died, before he died, he gave it to the Secretary of State of the Vatican. From there, it passed to his family. In 1938, it was brought to Queen of Angels. And because we're the province of St. Mary's, eventually it went from house to house, but now it's here.
How did it get to Queen of Angels?
I have no idea. All was the statue was given by the Secretary of State of the Vatican to his family after his death, and somehow it ended up coming to the Capuchins in 1938. So
It was personally commissioned by Pius IX.
yeah,
Wow.
and not the base, but the rest is solid silver. In Holland, they stole the crown, and it was only when it came here to this building, like 14 years ago, that we had the crown redesigned. Not redesigned, but made to put back in. That's why it kept moving from house to house. It was at Mary Immaculate, it was in New Jersey, it was in all different locations. So,
Beautiful.
and
Who is this friar?
Father Venantius Bushing.
Oh, I met him
He
once.
was the pastor of Our Lady of Sorrows.
I met him once, yes.
In fact, he might have been the pastor when Solanus went to Our Lady of Sorrows. So, because he's pictured with Father Venantius and Solanus are in the same photographs in Pitt Street. Here's Father Solanus right here in Pitt Street in that grotto in between the
Oh
buildings.
yes, we'll see. You haven't seen this. It's
Yeah.
well, it's quite a bit the same.
It's, no, it's the same. Solanus is
but
here.
yeah, at Our Lady of Sorrows.
Here, and
Oh,
this is where the school was.
Yeah,
But that's the church that's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be, because I think St. Joseph Hall burnt down in Calvary. And so I think, from what I understand, the longest standing foundation of a caption location would be Our Lady of Sorrows Church. I'm not sure on that, though.
Oh,
As far
okay.
as, because most of Mount Calvary has
Yes.
changed. and
Oh,
been
that's
rebuilt.
right. That's right.
But this church,
So-
this is the first church of the, Our Lady of Sorrows.
Mm-hmm.
And they opened up initially in a bar, in a saloon.
In a bar?
Yeah, Bonaventure took over a saloon or a bar, and that became the first church until he could get started. Yeah, and this was the door that Solanus would have greeted the people, with the front of the building.
So this would have
It
been.
was the entrance to the church.
That was the
original
entrance to
church.
the church, but
And that was the door that Solanus would greet the people coming in for mass cards or counseling or confession. And he would sweep the sidewalk in the morning, and people would be walking by, and he would engage them in conversation, and his rumor took off. Not his rumor, but his reputation took off, and people were flocking to see him. They would come up and said, go to the friary and get the holy priest. Well, the holy priest was Solanus, and the little girl would come up and bring them down and translate for Solanus to the Italian community.
yes.
And then one day she said, does my future look like? What's going to happen? And he said, you're going to become a sister of St. Agnes. And she did,
That's right. That's right.
Fairly
Fairly typical.
Yeah.
Yes. So the whole foundation for his priestly ministry began here
began here. Yeah.
and expanded.
And they kept changing him, but it just would flourish.
Yes.
Where,
Yes. And so this is the door where people would come in,
This would be the door.
and so his room was near there, up
Right,
there.
I'll show you his room.
Okay.
It's the second floor nearest the church. He would be here, answering the door.
After 2 years of ministry, like
In
we
there,
talked
right,
about in the
right.
sacristy, and
Right.
then he became.
Then he became the porter and helping the brothers
and
answer the door.
that
and
began
his
his.
ministry was blossomed after that. No matter where he went,
But it began here.
it began here.
That's right.
And the Father Solanus Casey's window for his bedroom when he was here is that second floor nearest the church. And again, he could look out from his window, and this was all country, and he could see the Palisades across the way.
You can't see the Hudson River though from here,
Not,
can you?
not from here. You can see parts
But-
of the, if you walk, you could see the Palisades, on the other side, from the other side of the river. But when he was here, his room was here basically because as soon as you leave the room, there's a staircase that brings you down here, and you can go to the door to answer the door for whoever was
So
coming.
he was very close.
Very close to the door.
And because, as you say, this was all,
This was all fields.
vacant, so it reminded him of growing up in Wisconsin.
Right.
And
You had cornfields. Hogs Hill was on this side, and here there was a rich family, the Enrights, who would bring groups in to entertain with classical music, and it was called Fiddler's Green. Initially, this was the friary, this first section that goes in, and then the church. And then he knew he was going to convert the church once he started here into more friary space. And then about 30 so years ago, we gutted the building and added bigger rooms for the senior friars.
Good afternoon. My name is Father Arlen Harris, and we're here at Our Lady of Sorrows Church on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, one of the places where Father Solanus Casey lived and served. And we have a very beautiful parish here, very beautiful parishioners, very good staff. And one of our staff members who works here is Miss Jackie Bisonneau, who in her own way does some of the work that Father Solanus did when he worked here. So I figured just to give Jackie a few moments just to tell us a little bit about what Father Solanus means to her.
I feel honored to actually do this type of work because Father Solanus was the doorkeeper, and I feel kind of like I'm doing something like him. And yeah, so I feel privileged that I can do a little bit of what he did. I cannot fill the shoes, but there's many people who come here uh, with problems, and I can lend an ear. I cannot solve their problems, but when they do come, I try to think what Father Solanus would do, and I try to listen, at least listen. So I try to use him, think of him as a model. And so I keep him very close to my heart. I also have his favorite quote, thank God in advance. And I always try to have that prayer in my heart. So that's something that I use in my life.
This is a record of the baptism that Father Solanus had here. Surprisingly, even though at Yonkers he had over 300 baptisms, here at Our Lady of Sorrows he didn't have many. At least this is one of the few recorded of him. But he did continue the work he had begun at Sacred Heart in Yonkers, being porter, and now Jackie continues that which he had done here. He came here in 1918 after 14 years at Yonkers. He then was here for 3 years, and interestingly, the pastor, this was a new parish beginning when he came, and the pastor was Father Bonaventure Fry, who was one of the founders of our province, and it was also the same provincial that invested him with the habit in Detroit. Then he came here and was building this parish and church at this time, 1918. So it was a continuation of his ministry, an important area in and people in his life. Beautifully continuing the ministry of Solanus and St. Francis and Jesus. So,
so it's
you're here with the people in their need, as people found Solanus being there for them when they came to him.
yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know if we entered this as Father Tom, who is the pastor here for the last 4 years, right? So we're grateful for this and all the continuing ministry that you do here, and how much Solanus means to you and the people.
Yeah, no, he's a wonderful, wonderful example for us of, humble service, being present, being present.
Father Tom, you told me that this altar, even though it was not originally here, it was originally up in the chapel that was in the friary right next door.
Right, so and actually that window is a window into that chapel. So that's the window into the friar's chapel. So they could look in and see the Mass here, so in the day. But yeah, so this altar here was in the original altar from the friar's chapel. And when that chapel was modernized, they took that altar out. And so it was sitting there, and Father Tom Fiola, knew we were using a more modern altar that had been a hand-me-down from another parish somewhere. And he thought, wouldn't it be nice to use the original altar that the brothers used in the chapel, and that Father Solanus would have used regularly, because it was the altar that the friars used in in the chapel. Of course, it would have been reverse, and so that tabernacle that you saw downstairs would have sat on the back of this, and the altar stone is actually toward the front here because you would have faced, it was
That
facing
would have
the
been
tabernacle.
against the wall.
Against the wall, or in this case, it was against this set of windows here.
Right,
where
right.
This chapel was set up.
But many times, Father Solanus would have been
Yeah.
offering the Mass on this altar.
On this altar, yeah. So
Yes.
it's a special altar. Now, so it's kind of nice, and it has the 4 Gospels on each side. So we have the symbols. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So you have the lion for Mark. Matthew is the man for the genealogy. The eagle for John, the sublimity of John, and Luke for the nativity, the birth in Bethlehem. So, and then Father Tom had the background painted a bit in to make the elements stand out a little more. So you see the elements, you see Christ the anchor, and of course the fish, and the 10 Commandments, the Hebrew, and then the implements of martyrdom for many of the saints and that have followed in the path of Christ, So.
Well, and then up higher, the loaves and the fishes, the grapes and the loaves and the Franciscan symbol of the crossed arms of Jesus and
right.
Francis.
And then the word Veneremus Cernui, Tantum Ergo Sacramentum. And actually the wooden candlesticks are actually on the side of this altar. You can't see
Oh,
them.
that,
So
yeah,
those wooden, twisted, fluted looking. So
yes.
they would have been along with you
Yes.
could see it now. You could see it all at one.
because we were saying yesterday, originally in all of our Capuchin friaries, it was wood.
Yeah.
And the candles were wood,
Were wood.
not golden,
That's right.
but wooden. And so they're,
Those wooden candlesticks are off to the side. We use them occasionally for different things. And they're
and originally, as you say, these were not painted. They were all part of
the
the
woodwork,
wood.
the
and-
tableau.
But to make
tableau.
them,
But to make them stand out
Sure,
more.
sure.
And it's fun because the people often ask me, what are these and what do they mean? And talk a little bit about the iconography of our tradition, And also the iconography of the friars with the shield, with the arm of Francis and the arm of Christ. with
That's
the
right.
stigmata. So for us, Father Solanus gave us a reason to begin talking more about our Franciscan charism, because what makes us different than any diocesan parish? We are priests in brown dresses. You know what I mean? So, and people are like, well, what's different here? Well, what is it that's different? And people will say, well, there's something different. They can't quite put their finger on it. But of course, it's the Franciscan element, the way we approach the gospel.
and the way we approach them, the people, right?
That's right.
As a result of the gospel.
That sort of incarnational
That's right.
spirituality. So we tend to begin with the fact that Christ was born, and that love. So much God loved the world that he gave us his only begotten Son. And that love is not dependent on our sin. And so people often come with this heavy burden of guilt and sin, and they just load it down. And so I'm just like, oh my goodness, we got to lift that off. Let's talk about this. And I think people recognize that's where we start from. Let's get the load off their back first. And then we'll talk,
And that's so much like Blessed Solanus when people were coming with their burdens, right? And how can we find a loving God in the midst of this?
Yeah.
And
so God must be angry at me, right?
Yes.
Right. This is the thing. People are convinced that
Yeah.
God must be angry. So Father Solanus, and I enjoy that we have the banners up. So it causes a little conversation, and people ask a question, and people will say, and there was a woman this morning at the morning mass who was from Detroit. And it happened to be it would have been her mother's 100th anniversary, and the mass was being held in Detroit, but she wasn't able to be there. And I said, oh, you're from Detroit. I said, go upstairs and light a candle. I said, and take a look, and you'll recognize Father Solanus Casey. I'm sure you know. Oh my goodness, yes, she knew all about Father Solanus. So she was delighted. She couldn't get back to Detroit for that Mass, but she could celebrate Mass with us here. So it was nice.
Where Solanus had also lived
yeah,
and ministered.
So we are sort of on the beaten path in that sense. We will occasionally get sojourners who are following the life of Father Solanus Casey.
Really?
Yep. Coming from California, New Mexico, it's odd, but people will just show up and come to Mass or ask to see the church because they see the banners on the front of the building. So sure, come on in. And so we talk a little bit about Father Solanus.
Well, and the Capuchins have been ministering at this parish actually a good bit before Solanus.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so it would have been 50 years before Solanus. Yeah.
So the friars have been here, and it's been a very important place.
Yeah.
And Solanus was proud to have been here. And the pastor at that time, wasn't that Father Bonaventure? Or was he the one that...
That's a good question. Who was the pastor? I'd have to take the book out and look.
Well, he's the one that helped to build this church, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So
and he's the one that gave Solanus his habit.
Oh, okay.
So it was a real connection.
So and I know that Father Bonaventure was here, and then was asked after he had established this parish. They had built the school a few years later, built the friary, and then they asked him to take on a parish up in Midtown, St. John's.
Yes,
And,
yes.
Because at that point the trustee movement was very big here, and the archdiocese, the diocese was trying to get the parishes back into the fold, because they were kind of going the way of the Congregationalists. So I know he was sent up there to take on St. John the Baptist. Now, we have our history book here. I can look and see who the pastor was during that time, but it was kind of fun because we had the 150th anniversary. We got a chance to put the book together and look at some of the histories. We have the old histories, the history that was written at the 50th anniversary in 1917, and then at the 100th anniversary, which was in 1967. So interesting, and we just recently.
That's interesting that the 50th anniversary was 1917.
Yeah.
That was the year before he came here.
Yeah.
So it was already 50 years old.
Isn't that amazing? And so they did their work. I know Father Bonaventure and the historians write of how they climbed the steps of all these walk-ups to let people know that Mass was being offered here. And of course it was a German enclave, Klein Deutschland. And one of the mementos of that time is the Pietà. It's carved of wood, and it's a gift from King Ludwig of Bavaria to the German-speaking people of Klein Deutschland. So it's kind of a neat thing to think that has been here all this time.
And that was a gift of the King of Bavaria to this parish.
To this parish, yeah.
So that was here probably very much toward the beginning.
Oh yes, that would have been when I believe when the church was opened. I think they had obtained that.
It's beautiful.
Because it was the centerpiece, and they built the altar around it, I think. Yeah.
So in the early days, they called this, I didn't know, Kleine Deutschland.
Klein Deutschland, this
little
was Little
Germany.
Yeah, Little Germany.
Wow.
And so this was an overflow parish built from the Redemptorist parish at Most Holy Redeemer on 3rd Street. And this was an overflow parish from that. And actually the friars stayed there when they came from Mount Calvary to establish this parish. They stayed with the Redemptorists while they were developing the parish and building the parish. But the stories are wonderful when you read of how the faith of the people and how they were here with the people. And this being always an immigrant neighborhood, so it was morphing into an Italian neighborhood. By the time Solanus came, he speaks of the Italians and how
Which he had met already quite a bit at Sacred Heart.
Sure.
Yes.
So the neighborhood was going Italian by the time Solanus got here. And so there was a big need for Italian friars who could speak Italian. And that was the going language until about World War II, when the Puerto Ricans started to become the dominant group. And then the friars, I know, imported a priest or two from Spain, the Father Arriaga, who also wrote a little history of the time he spent here.
Yes.
And so it was the beginning. And then the friars from here gradually traveled to Central America and Puerto Rico and learned Spanish and were able to then minister. So this was really a center of a lot of activity and even street.
In and out,
In and
both.
out, yeah. And
Yes.
street activity, and then friars studying here, working here, going to Central America, coming back, and being stationed here. In those days, the fourth floor would have been more like a barracks. It was just one big room with beds, and so.
Of friars.
Yeah, so that would be a place for student friars in the summertime. Would come and stay. Yeah.
And now the main immigrant population is Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic, that's right.
Hello, we are standing in front of Our Lady Queen of Angels, Our Lady Queen of Angels Parish Church. And this is the third place in the New York area where Blessed Solanus Casey ministered. First it was Yonkers, then Our Lady of Sorrows, and then here at Our Lady Queen of Angels. Right now, this parish unfortunately is closed as a parish by the Archdiocese because of quite a few parishes within the very close proximity. There are Franciscan sisters that still live here, and Blessed Solanus Convent, and that right next to the church is where the friary was that Solanus and the other Cabotian brothers lived while they ministered here. This was significant in Blessed Solanus's life. It was here, this would be part of Harlem, and it was here that he had his first wider experience with African American people. And for nearly 2 years, among his ministries, he was also a chaplain in the Harlem prison. And a fair number of the people in the prison were African Americans. And you might remember way back before he ever became a Cabotian, one of his first jobs to help his family get money was being a guard in the Stillwater, Minnesota prison, which is right across the river near Prescott, right across the Mississippi River. So he was doing here what he had begun to do in Stillwater. He loved that ministry with the African Americans and in the prison. Yonkers had expanded his relationships with Italians and Jews, and he found all of that life-giving. And here it was expanded more to include African Americans. And a touching part of that ministry in the jail was that every Christmas he would send a personal handmade card to each of the prisoners to let them know his personal concern. And they felt it, every one of them. they tell that in his weekly services with the inmates, that more often he had African Americans at those services than anybody else, and a good number of those, the majority of those, weren't even Catholic, but they felt his love and his goodness, the way he was present to them. So Queen of Angels is important in Solanus's life for that expanding more and more his love and relationships with all peoples. We are here in the Church of Our Lady, Queen of Angels, where Father Solanus, Blessed Solanus, lived and ministered for 3 years, from 1921 to 1924. And this is one of the beautiful stained glass windows that is still in the church, and that certainly Solanus would have known and loved and more than likely prayed in front of. Our Lady Queen of Angels, these 3 years, was important for another very significant development in his life. You know, ever since he was at Yonkers and then Our Lady of Sorrows and continuing here, the word about what that holy priest, or what happened when you brought worries and concerns about health problems or financial problems, whatever, when you brought those concerns to this holy priest, that's what the people called him, things would happen, and miracles, or what people considered miracles, would be reported. And it was here that the provincial, Father Benno, had a visitation, the annual visit of the provincial with the friars, and he had heard, naturally, in Detroit about these experiences that people were having through the prayers and ministry of Solanus. So when our provincial, Father Benno, had his personal visit with Father Solanus that year, 1924, he suggested to him that let's keep a record of these incidents, these stories that keep happening. Could you record them? And Solanus said immediately, of course, that's a good idea. And typical of Solanus, that the whole idea was to give honor and glory to God. Look at what God is doing here, there, so many places. And he immediately went out and bought a spiral notebook and began that very day to record incidents, requests, and then many, many times the results, which were to the glory of God. Look at what God is doing. And he kept, that was where that began, right here at Our Lady Queen of Angels, and it continued up until he died. And in Detroit, we have notebook after notebook in his handwriting, obviously, of all these incidents where God is so good and people's faith is so strong, and their love of the missions, because as you undoubtedly know, he would usually ask them to be concerned about other people, not just their own individual problem. And maybe could you enroll this person in the Seraphic Mass Association, which was an association that benefited the Capuchin missions throughout the world, and in return everyone who was enrolled was remembered in all the masses of the Capuchins throughout the world. And in those days, it cost 50 cents. And if they could do that, Solanus always asked for some symbol of response on the people's part, rather than just ask, and now you do that. No, what are you doing to help create the environment that is open to God's love and goodness and healing? So the record of records of all of that began right here at Our Lady Queen of Angels. Deo gratias, as Solanus would say.